Chapter 16. A Secret Search. The gold bracelet with the dainty little horse charms was gone. Nancy was exceedingly upset to hear this news from her father. It had been her best clue to solving the mystery of Lolita's parents. Now she could not compare the little charms to see if the one which Lolita wore was a substitute. "Don't take it so hard," Mr. Drew advised his daughter, seeing her deep frown. "I have asked Chief McGinnis to help on the case. He'll turn up something." Nancy told her father what the old clown, Sanders, had inferred about Lolita's trinket, that it was only an imitation. "I strongly suspect," Nancy said, "that Croon or Mrs. Croon may have sold the original trinket and had a cheap substitute made." "No doubt," the lawyer agreed. "Besides wanting to solve this mystery and help Lolita," said Nancy, "I'd just love to find the sixth horse to my bracelet." Her father smiled. "And I dare say," he remarked, "that when you do, you'll give the whole thing to Lolita Flanders for a wedding gift." "Not unless it rightfully belongs to her," Nancy said. "After all, Aunt Eloise gave me the lovely gift, and it won't be easy to part with it." Mr. Drew arose. "I must hurry back to River Heights, Nancy. Incidentally, Hannah and I miss you very much. We'll be glad when your week in the circus is up." Nancy laughed. "If things should go wrong here, I may be back sooner than that. By the way, Dad, did you have a chance to get in touch with anyone in England about Lola Flanders?" Mr. Drew said that he had cabled a lawyer friend of his in London, but there had been no time for an answer as yet. "I'll let you know as soon as I hear anything," he promised, kissing her goodbye, and left the tent. Erica came in a few moments later and at once asked what had happened to her. "What do you mean?" Nancy asked. "Because you look as if you'd lost your best friend." Nancy recounted all the news Mr. Drew had told her. Erica said that she was glad the mystery about Hitch had been cleared up, but she had to admit that his story about the Croons had complicated matters. "Do you suppose Mrs. Croon kidnapped Lolita?" she asked, her eyes opening wide. Nancy shrugged and asked Erica to keep the matter in strictest confidence. If Croon should find out what Hitch had told the police, there was no predicting what the Ringmaster might do. "I saw Mr. Croon a couple of times this morning," Erica told Nancy. "He seemed to be in a worse humor than usual. Do you suppose it has anything to do with the mystery? He might even have found out that Lolita and Pietro had planned to elope and then changed their minds because of your suspicions about him." "It's possible," said Nancy. "Pietro once remarked that there was a spy in the circus who carries tales to Mr. Croon." Nancy did not tell Erica another suspicion of hers, that the stolen bracelet might be at the circus. She was sure that whoever had stolen it had done so at Croon's request. "I must find out," the young sleuth told herself. But how? Erica remarked that she hoped Nancy's worries about the mystery would not affect her performance that afternoon. Nancy laughed and assured Erica that she would do her best. And she did. Later, her roommate remarked that Nancy had never done her stunt riding better. Nancy made a point of sitting next to Lolita at supper that evening. As soon as she had an opportunity, she asked Lolita if she had mentioned to her foster parents that Nancy had the bracelet. "Why, yes, I did. Is something the matter?" Nancy did not reply, but asked Lolita if she could remember when she had told them. The aerialist thought a few moments then said it was sometime during the last day that the circus was in River Heights. There was no question now in Nancy's mind that Croon had engineered the theft. During the rest of the meal, the young sleuth kept trying to figure out how to prove her point. "I'll bet whoever stole the bracelet brought it here to the circus," she reasoned. "And if he did, it's my guess that the bracelet is hidden in Mr. Croon's trailer." Later, Nancy confided in Dan Webster about the theft of the bracelet and why she thought it might be in Croon's possession. She said she was wondering how she could find out if her suspicions were correct. "I thought perhaps I'd get in touch with the police captain," she said. "Maybe he could make a search." Dan Webster thought that this was the sensible thing to do, but it had one big drawback. "Croon will know at once that you instigated the search, since it's your bracelet," he reminded Nancy. "He'll instantly make trouble for both you and the other riders in the act." Nancy had to admit that there was merit in Dan Webster's objections. Suddenly, her eyes lighted up. "Dan," she said, "how would you like to play detective for me?" "Me?" Dan Webster began to laugh. "You don't mean you want me to go make that search? I'd be sure to get caught." "No, not make the search. Just lay the groundwork for me," Nancy suggested. Dan Webster scratched his head. "Well, keep talking. I'll let you know my answer after I hear what you want me to do." "I can't tell you now," Nancy said hurriedly. "I see Mr. Croon coming. I'll meet you in your office after the show." The two separated, but after the show was over, Nancy returned to Webster's office. She said to the horse trainer in a low voice, "This is what I'd like you to do. First, follow Mr. Croon until he goes to his trailer. Then call on him." "But what excuse could I use?" Dan Webster asked. "Oh, that's easy," Nancy said quickly. "Tell him that Rosa will not be able to perform by the end of the week. Ask him what he thinks about the new girl continuing for a while longer." "But how is this going to find your bracelet?" the horse trainer questioned, puzzled. "Dan," Nancy went on, "tell him that you've heard rumors of things disappearing from the circus. Watch Mr. Croon's face intently to see if there's any change of expression or if the ringmaster's eyes dart to some possible hiding place. Then tell him you've heard that one of the girls in the circus is going to ask for a police search unless something valuable which was stolen from her turns up." As Nancy gave her instructions, Dan Webster sat gazing at the floor. He shook his head several times but did not speak. Finally, he looked up. "Miss Drew," he said, "I want to help you as much as I can, but this is a big order. I'm afraid I'd fail. You'd better count me out and get somebody else." Nancy laughed softly. "Oh, it isn't that bad, Dan," she told him. "I'll tell you what. Suppose I stand outside the window and watch Croon's actions. You act as innocent as you can, but try to follow the lines of conversation I suggested." At last, Dan Webster said he would try, and the time was set for 11:30. Nancy thanked him and hurried off to change her clothes. When Erica saw her starting out again, she asked where Nancy was going. "To do some sleuthing, but don't be worried. I'm not going to leave the circus grounds." Nancy hurried from the tent. Using a circuitous route to avoid as many people as possible, she went to Mr. Croon's trailer. She could hear voices inside distinctly. No one was in sight, and Nancy cautiously made her way to the side window and stood on a box. Through the window, she could get a good view of the interior, but still remain out of the line of vision of those within. Dan Webster was there, talking with Lolita's foster parents. Evidently, the early part of the previously planned conversation had already taken place, because Croon was just saying, "The new girl's all right, but I'll let you know tomorrow about her staying with us after this week. There are certain things about her I don't like." "What are they?" Dan asked quickly. "Nothing that you could do anything about, Webster," the ringmaster replied. "They're personal reasons." Dan arose, but before leaving he said, "By the way, Mr. Croon, I've heard rumors about things disappearing from the circus." Croon gave a slight twitch, and Nancy saw his eyes travel involuntarily to a bureau in the trailer. To Dan, he said, "I haven't heard anything about it. You shouldn't believe everything you hear." "Probably not." Dan Webster gave a slightly forced laugh. "I guess rumors fly around thick and fast in the circus." He left the trailer and started for his own quarters. Dan had failed to carry out the last part of Nancy's instructions, but it did not matter. She had found out what she wanted to know. The bureau was probably the hiding place. Nancy continued to eavesdrop outside the trailer, but neither Mr. nor Mrs. Croon mentioned the bracelet or Dan's visit. Presently, Mrs. Croon transferred to Lolita's trailer, where she lived, apparently to watch her foster daughter's movements. A few minutes later, the window shades on both trailers were drawn, and soon afterward the lights were turned off. Nancy made her way back to her tent, convinced that the bracelet was in the bureau in Croon's trailer. She only hoped that the ringmaster would not remove it before she had a chance to carry out the next part of her plan. Early the following morning, she went to find Lolita. She was forced to wait for several minutes while the aerialist and her foster parents finished breakfast in Mr. Croon's trailer. Finally, the ringmaster left, and Lolita started back to her own quarters. Nancy beckoned her to walk to a more secluded spot where they might talk. Quickly, the girl detective divulged her suspicions about the bracelet. Lolita was aghast to hear that her foster father might be a thief. Nancy said she was sorry, but felt that it was necessary for Lolita to know all the facts in order to help solve the mystery. "I want you to search that bureau," Nancy told her. Lolita looked frightened. "But how can I?" she said. "Mother's always in one trailer or the other." "I'll arrange for her to leave," said Nancy. "I'll have Erica ask her to come out to our tent and help with some sewing." Lolita finally consented to the scheme. An hour later, when Mrs. Croon was safely out of the way, the aerialist went into her father's trailer. Nancy posted herself at the window. Some distance away was Dan Webster, acting as a lookout. Lolita pulled out drawer after drawer, lifting various articles aside and feeling beneath pieces of clothing. The bracelet was not in any of the drawers. Just as Lolita opened the lowest drawer, Nancy heard a low whistle. Looking up, she saw Dan Webster warning her of danger. Reinhold Croon was almost at the trailer. Through the window, Nancy hissed at Lolita. The girl was so engrossed in her search that she did not hear her friend. The next moment, Croon stepped inside. Seeing the open bureau, he thundered at Lolita. "What are you doing?" End of chapter 16.